Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that a biological male is the most suitable candidate to lead a feminist organisation? Now, I'm not talking about one of those organisations where a bunch of men who wear shirts that say, this is what a real feminist looks like. I'm not talking about one of those kind of organisations. I'm actually talking about a feminist, like a pure, true blue, feminist, woman's focused, female-driven feminist organisation. The reason I ask you that question is because that is exactly what has just happened in Quebec. Now, please forgive me because I am not particularly good at French, and so I'm almost certainly going to murder the pronunciation here. But an organisation by the name of the Fédération des Femmes de Quebec have just announced that a biological male who self-identifies as a woman by the name of Gabrielle Bouchard is their new leader, their new president. Now, this organisation represents some 300 feminist groups. So they're an umbrella organisation that represents a whole lot of other feminist organisations, and they have just appointed a biological male to be their leader. Now, surely at some point we've got to start saying that the emperor has no clothes on. Now, by the way, the reason I'm talking about this issue and asking this question of you is because my wife raised it with me. I didn't see this story, my wife did, and she said to me, what? What is this all about? How can this man, even though he self-identifies as a woman, how can he ever truly understand femininity, what it is to be a woman? He can't, right? Because reality is reality. Let me tell you a little story. About 10 years ago, I was at a New Zealand university to speak at a public event. And I was approached by a young female student there. And during the course of our conversation, she said to me, you do realise that gender's just a social construct, don't you? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, gender is not real. And I said, please explain, because it turns out that I may well have been using the wrong toilets all these years. So this inquiring mind really wants to know what you mean by that statement. And she said to me, well, gender is nothing more than a social construct. The only reason that you are a male is because you identify as a male and your friends treat you as a male. But if you identified as a female and your friends treated you as a female, then you would be a female. And so I said to her, and this is truly how this conversation went, I said, let me ask you a question then. What if I identify as a chicken? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I knew from a very young age that I was different to all my friends. I was attracted to roosters from a very, very young age at school. I knew something was a bit different there. Whenever we had a school dance, all I wanted to hear was the birdie dance played over and over again. And whenever I get together with my friends, they take my food and they turn it into pellets and they throw it on the floor and I wander around picking it up. So I believe I'm a chicken. My friends treat me like a chicken. Would that mean that I am actually a chicken? Now, at this point, what I was waiting for her to say was, oh, don't be so stupid. You've taken it too far. You're just being absurd. And so we could have a conversation about the flaws in her logic and her confused understanding, which was completely detached from reality, about biological sex. But she didn't say, don't be stupid, you've taken it far. She looked at me. She didn't even break a smile. She didn't even miss a beat. She just looked at me and said, well, then I suppose you'd be a chicken. And she was dead serious. Now, I was a bit shocked at this point because, as I said, I was still waiting for her to say, don't be so stupid, but she didn't. And so then I started to ask her. Unfortunately, our conversation was brought to an end before we could finish the discussion. So then I said, well, naturally, the next question is, what if I believe that I don't actually exist? And so I believe I'm invisible. I believe I'm not here, that my existence is not a real thing. I'm a figment of my own imagination. And my friends, while they all ignore me because I don't exist, right? I believe I don't exist. My friends treat me as if I don't exist. Then I mustn't exist, right? And so in that state, if I was to punch you in the head or to steal your handbag, I'm not guilty of anything because I don't exist. Now, as I said, unfortunately, our conversation had to come to a rather quick end when she had to go off to another class before we could finish that line of discourse about this important issue. But the reason I'm telling you the story is because when I had that experience 10 years ago, that was like a funny anecdote, and I could tell that story. That really happened. That conversation happened exactly the way I've just described it. And I could tell that story. Whenever I did public speaking events, I would often tell that story if it was relevant to the topic I was talking about. And people, it didn't matter what creed or nationality or political persuasion they were from, the vast majority of people would laugh at that anecdote because they understood the absurdity of what was going on. But here's the point. Here we are 10 years later, and that anecdote is no longer a joke. People are actually treating that anecdote and basing their entire view of reality on that same absurd reasoning. Now, I get it. Some people are going to struggle with gender dysphoria. They are going to struggle with a type of body dysphoria where they don't believe that their body is actually the right body, and they believe that they should be another biological sex to the one that they actually are. And there's all sorts of psychological struggles with that. And for some people, they are going to live lives where they express what their mind is telling them rather than what is actually real. I get it. Now, people are free as adults to make their own choices. I don't think for a second that we should be subjecting young children to any of this nonsense. And I still don't accept that a person who has a particular biological sex can change their sex just because their psychology tells them that they are a different sex. The whole idea is totally contradictory when you think about it. If your sex is nothing more than a psychological thing, it's just a social construct, it's just what you tell yourself, what you believe about yourself, then what that would mean is it would have nothing to do with your physical body and your physicality, right? But every time someone changes their sex, they always change their physicality in some way to match their new sex. So why would you do that? You wouldn't need to change your physicality, surely, unless your physical body, your physicality, your biology is actually a fundamental determining factor in what your actual sex really and truly is. Now, I get it, people are going to make those kind of choices as adults and how they live their life, but surely it's another thing altogether when you have now got people who have embraced this ideology to the point where you have a biological male who is able to be elected, put in charge of a large feminist organization which represents a whole lot of other feminist groups. You see, surely at that point someone should be saying, hey, the jig is up. They should be like that little boy in the story who puts his hand up and says, hey, I'm the only one brave enough to say this because maybe I'm a kid and I'm not controlled and bound by your crazy social conventions, but that person is not a woman. That person is a man who has a psychological belief that they're a woman, but because they are not actually a woman, how can they ever actually understand what it is to be female? Now, sure, they can read about it, they can talk about it, but they can never truly understand it because they can never truly live it because they aren't actually female. How did we get to this point? How did we get to this point? And at what point are we actually going to stop and say to ourselves as a society, hold on a minute, things are starting to get a little bit out of control here. You see, for me, I understand this issue because I'm not someone who has been conditioned with this false idea that reality is something you construct for yourself. There are certain things you tell yourself about yourself, which, if you like, construct a certain view of the world for you. But reality is a real thing. There is such a thing as objective truth. There is such a thing as objective reality. And it's something that we participate in. It's not something that we construct. It's not like I turn around and everything that I was looking at when I was facing the previous direction is all of a sudden disappeared because I no longer see it. That's not what reality is. I don't construct reality. And one thing I don't construct and we can't construct is biological sex. It is an objective reality. And surely at some point, and even within the feminist community, someone surely is going to have to start, or large groups of feminists are going to have to start standing up and saying, hold on a minute. So now we've got men who are competing at major international sporting competitions and taking the places, the rightful places of females, even though they clearly have a physical advantage in that context. And now we have a biological male who can never experience menstruation or pregnancy or childbirth or any of those unique aspects of the feminine genius, and he is able to become the head of a feminist organization. See, I don't see how this is anything other than a complete denial of reality. It's a complete denial of the fact that men and women are actually different. We have a complementarity based on those differences, but we each bring different strengths to the world. And that femininity, just like masculinity, is not simply a figment of your imagination. It's something far more profound than that, and it involves the whole person, including their biology. As always, I would love to know what you think though, so please let me know in the comments section below. What do you think? And don't forget, if you like the content I'm producing, I'd really appreciate your support to be able to make more of it. I've got a Patreon, the link is below in the description, and it's also on screen now, so please give generously if you like the content and you want to see more of it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.